Off Script with Super E recommends listener discretion, as these real but sometimes uncensored stories can be filled with mature content.
Hello, everybody. This is A Train. I'm here with Super E, the star of our show. How are you, Super E?
Doing good. Looking forward to a nice Labor Day weekend. How's everybody else doing?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. Should be nice. Nice long weekend. Okay, well,
Right on.
have you got a good story to tell us?
Yeah, this one involves my old partner, Big Old Steve. And A-Train, you worked with Big Old Steve for a while, didn't you?
I sure did. One of my favorite guys.
Well, yes, hilarious, fun to work with. Well, when we were working together the second time, when we both were doing Vice about 20 some years ago, there was one prostitute working the hot dog stand, and she was getting arrested, but she was in court because she was deaf. And her public defender would bring up every time, well, my client didn't know what was actually going on because she's deaf, and they have no evidence that she made an agreement. And so, you know, she was pretty slick. Well, then she come up against Big Old Steve, and the night he got her, what happened was she gets in the car, and then he realizes, oh, she's the deaf girl. So she starts, you know, kind of doing the little bit of the sign language, the universal sign language, so he could understand, you know, about fellatio and money and all that.
Okay, so yeah, I think I know that universal sign language for fellatio, but describe it for us, Super E.
Well, it's like, I guess, when the female makes a fist, and then she makes a motion towards her mouth, and then I guess Steve take it. Yes, and then for the money, she would take her thumb and index and middle finger and rub them together for U.S. currency.
Yes.
So, but then Steve realized, you know, this is probably going to go to court. So he had to have evidence that she was making this agreement for fellatio in exchange for U.S. currency / $25.
Right.
So Steve was smart. He took out a piece of paper and had a pen and said, how much for head? And she wrote down $25. And Steve says, okay. Like, and then, do you want your money up front? And she said, yes. So
she wrote yes, or just nodded yes, whatever.
No, she wrote yes. So he had what he needed.
Right.
He had what he needed. So Steve locks her up. She goes to jail. And she thinks her and her public defender, they're going to use the same old little scheme again. That she, you know, there's no evidence. There's no recording. There's no verbal statement.
Right.
And so as the trial, it's just a bench trial in front of a judge at misdemeanor court. As it's going to trial, generally the public defender would always like to talk to the officer before the case went, like, out in the hallway. And you were under the assumption that the public defender was like, okay, what evidence you got? Yeah. All right, that's pretty strong. We're just going to ask for a plea agreement.
Right.
That's generally how it went. So the public defender's talking to Steve about the case. And, you know, he's, you know, hey, she's deaf. And Steve goes, well, I have this note here where me and her bargained for the price for the fellatio. You know, I wrote this, she wrote that. I have this right here that proves that she knew what we were doing. And the public defender goes, oh, really? Do you have that note? Steve goes, it's right here. The public defender goes, can I see it for a second? And Steve goes, yeah. So he looked at it and he handed it back to Steve. So they go for the bench trial of the judge. It was just like 3 minutes later, because it was like a real quick meeting outside, go in front of the judge. So you got the public defender standing right in front of the judge, standing right next to the public defender is our deaf prostitute defendant. And standing right next to her, it's like shoulder to shoulder, is big old Steve. And then the prosecutor was standing right next to the judge, facing Steve as he, interviewed him.
Right.
So Steve lays out his evidence, and the public defender goes, when on the cross-examination, he goes, Detective Steve, this note you have that you presented as evidence here, has it been in your possession the whole time since the evening of the arrest? And Steve goes, yes, it has. Public defender goes, Your Honor, Detective Steve is not telling the truth. He's not coming forward with the truth on this. I move for a acquittal based on that. And the judge looked over and goes, and the judge looked at the public defender and says, what do you mean? How do you know this? He goes, well, Your Honor, just 3 minutes ago, I was talking to Detective Steve in the hallway, and he was telling me about the note. I asked to look at it, and he handed it to me, and then I handed it back to him. So, Your Honor,
Oh, God,
I move for a not guilty verdict based on Detective Steve's false statement. And the judge was like, you're kidding, right? And he goes, overruled, continue, Detective Steve. So Steve puts the note on the table, and he starts, after the prosecutor was asking a question, he starts explaining, this is where I wrote, I want head, how much for head, and this is where she wrote 25. And as soon as Steve was getting ready to say that, he noticed the prostitute defendant was looking around at him and looking up at him, and all of a sudden she reaches over immediately, grabs the note, shoves it into her face, and starts chewing on it.
Oh, no.
And then Steve said he heard a big gulp where she chugged it down her throat, and then she crossed her arms real defiant and victorious, like she thought the case was over. And the judge looked at her and goes, I find you guilty of prostitution.
Oh, my God.
And Steve said everybody in the court started laughing.
Oh, my.
It was just one of them times when, you hate going to court, but sometimes going to court was actually pretty fun, and you would always have a good story to tell later on that day. If he was working late shift when he got in the office, you could tell everybody what happened.
That sounds like something that's on like a sitcom, like on, Seinfeld, or It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia or something. That's hilarious.
Yeah, something like that. Yes. Steve just said he laughed, and the prosecutor laughed. Everybody was laughing.
She reverted to really the only thing she knew in her only defense, and that was to swallow.
Exactly. But it didn't work for her this time. And then here's the funny thing about that. The next night, she gets released, of course, the next day.
Right.
Nothing happened. Nothing
Revolving
really happened
door.
to her.
Yeah.
Yeah, she got released the next day. So Big Steve is sitting at a stoplight, and he's just paying attention, waiting for the stoplight to turn green. And all of a sudden, he hears this, and he looks to his left, and he sees a carload of people, and it's this prostitute that that ate the note.
Yeah.
And it was her family, and they were all deaf, and they were screaming at him and flipping him off. And he's like, what? And Steve was stunned, and then when the light turned green, they just peeled out and took off.
They were giving him a rash of shit. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That's funny.
They was giving him the Helen Keller beat down.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh. That's like a classic Super E and Steve story. Only that kind of stuff happens to you. That's classic. Classic Steve.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun working together.
I honestly, when I worked with Steve, absolutely one of the best times of my career. Had just nonstop. No, we did a lot of work, but nonstop laughter. Yes,
It was
fantastic.
constant hilarity all the time.
Yeah, it was. It was. And
but
Steve
like you said, Steve would what?
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, but we worked hard,
Yeah.
We'd go out, make our arrest, check our complaints, and we would get things done.
Exactly. And then we'd laugh.
Yes. Yeah, then we'd spend the rest of the night laughing.
That's good stuff. All right. Well, that was a really good, quick little story there, Super E.
That's we call them the quick hitters. Just a real quick one.
A quick hitter for the listeners. Hope they liked it.
Exactly.
All right.